welcome. Thank you all for coming. So this event caps the three days of Alumni Day weekend. And the first day was dedicated to reconnecting. The second day was a look back at our history and what makes us unique. And this event is meant to show the way we're going. And I think that given the strong interest in STEM in this college, and the fact that increasingly a lot of us will have to be self-employed because the job market is just losing jobs. So I think it's very valuable for us to promote entrepreneurship. And as you may know, last year we developed a class in collaboration with the Center of Innovation and Entrepreneurial Development on entrepreneurship that's offered in the summer. And it uses the platform that was designed by our distinguished speaker, Mr. Blank. So it's really an honor to have him here, and especially if you're familiar with this platform. So he really is one of the most respected conceptual leaders in entrepreneurship and innovation. He's been 30 years in the high-tech industry, founding or co-founding 8 startup companies, 4 of which have gone public. In addition to his success as a serial entrepreneur, Mr. Blank is widely regarded for developing the concept that startups represent a unique set of challenges relative to large companies, and therefore need their own set of processes and tools. His customer development method provided the intellectual foundation for the lean startup movement, which made the cover page of the Harvard Review of Business in 2013. His lean launchpad class has since been incorporated into the National Science Foundation Innovation Corps and become the standard for commercialization for all federal research. Mr. Blank's work also offers a valuable perspective on the emergence of Silicon Valley's startup ecosystem. He's a prolific public speaker and blogger. He has been featured in Reuters, the New York Times, Forbes, TechCrunch, and the Wall Street Journal, and has written 4 books: The 4 Steps to Epiphany, Not All Those Who Wander Are Lost, The Startup Owner's Manual, and Holding a Cat by the Tail. His influential work has had an impact on how startups are built, how entrepreneurship is taught, how science is commercialized, and how large companies and our government innovate. So, without any further ado, here's his talk entitled Entrepreneurship and Ethical Dilemmas in a Competitive World. And I'm hoping that after this talk we'll have also a little follow-up debate. Thank you.
Maybe the talk will be shorter than the introduction. Even though I just live up the coast, I've never had the opportunity to start a talk by saying, go banana slugs. So I'm honored for the opportunity to speak here today. I'm going to talk about innovation and entrepreneurship, and we'll leave the ethical discussion to kind of the end of the talk. But I'm curious, how many of you are involved in the tech business at all? How many have started a company, been in a startup? Anyway? All right. For the rest of you, you can throw rocks or glaze over, but I just wanted to remind you we're about 20 air miles away from the epicenter of technology innovation, at least where it started. Obviously, there's a lot going on around Santa Cruz and the Monterey Bay as well. I spent my life in innovation, as mentioned, 8 startups in 21 years, and the last 15 years in academia. Since I can no longer do it, I teach it. I lived through the time when working in my first job in Ann Arbor, Michigan. We had to get out a map. And for those of you who haven't seen one, it's a paper thing. You cut down dead trees, you put ink on it. To find out that we didn't know the way to San Jose, because it was not only in Puerto Rico, but there was a city with that same name in California. And that's where I had to get my plane ticket to help me install some computer equipment. There used to be a Ford assembly plant in Milpitas, and that's where I came out to work. And 39 years ago, I got on that plane, and I never went back. I've seen the valley grow from Sunnyvale to Santa Clara, which was kind of the center of Silicon, to today it stretches from San Jose to South Market. I watched it go from Microwave Valley, believe it or not, to Defense Valley, to Silicon Valley, then to Internet Valley. But today, the major product of what we make in this entire region is not on any one technology. What we do here is innovation. That is the main business of this region. And I've been lucky enough to watch innovation happen, not only in hardware and software, but in life sciences, in therapeutics, medical devices, diagnostics, and now digital health. So I've been asked to talk today on the future of innovation, and typically that involves giving you a list of hot technologies to pay attention to. Technologies like machine learning, both hardware and software, and the applications that will pour out of this, just one technology will transform every industry from autonomous vehicles to automated radiology and oncology, diagnostics, and equally transformative, if you want another hot technology tip, on the life science side, CRISPR and Cas enable the rapid editing of the genome, and that's going to change life sciences as radically as machine intelligence. But today's talk about the future of innovation is not about these technologies at all, so you put your pen down because that's it for hot tips. In fact, it's not about any new technology. The future of innovation really is about 7 changes that's made innovation itself possible at the size and scale that's never existed before. And we've created a world where innovation is not just new technology, but it's literally a perpetual motion machine. And so I'm going to tell you how this happened and where's it going. So just a little background, and I'll reference a video where there's more detail here, but Silicon Valley itself emerged by the truly accidental and serendipitous intersection of a couple of things. One is Cold War research in microwaves and electronics at Stanford. 2 is a Stanford Dean of Engineering named Fred Terman, who encouraged startup culture over pure academic research. The first students, he told, you'd be crummy academics, but great business people were his grad students named Hewlett and Packard in 1938. And he continued doing that for another 30 years. Now, Cold War military and intelligence funding actually drove microwave and military products for the defense industry in the Valley in the 50s. And a single Bell Labs researcher who actually was doing World War II operations research on anti-submarine warfare decided to leave Bell Labs and started a semiconductor company next to Stanford in the 50s, which led to the whole wave of semiconductor startups in the 60s and 70s. In fact, out of this one guy's company called Shockley Semiconductor, 65 other chip companies can trace their origin. Then there was the emergence of venture capital in the mid-70s as a professional industry, and then the PC revolution in the 80s, the rise of the internet in the 90s, and now the wave of internet commerce in the first decade or 2 of the 21st century. And finally, we're seeing now the flood of risk capital, that is angels, venture capital into startups at a size and scale that was not only unimaginable at its start, but would have seemed laughable, the amount of dollars that are being thrown about. So up until the beginning of this century, the pattern for the Valley seemed to be clear. Each new wave of innovation, microwaves, defense, silicon, disk drives, PCs, internet, therapeutics, was like punctuated equilibrium. Just when you thought the wave had run its course into like decline, a sudden shift and radical change into a new family of technology emerged. But there was a set of barriers and limits to the growth of entrepreneurship in the 20th century. While startups continue to innovate in each new wave of technology, the rate of innovation was constrained by limitations we can only now understand. Startups in the past were constrained by 7 things I want to talk about. Number 1 is customers, believe it or not, for technology in the Valley were initially government and large companies that adopted technology slowly. Number 2, it took a long time to get technologies to market. As you start a company, and it would be years. 3 is we thought of founders, the crazy people, the visionaries, as disposable. By disposable, I mean, okay, they launched the product, thank you very much, we're bringing a suit. Somebody who actually had matching pants to this jacket, maybe wore a tie, and they would take the company public, and the founder would kind of disappear into irrelevance. 4 is, there was a high cost of getting to the first customers. It took a lot of money to build that first product. Number 5 is the structure of the venture capital community was limited. There were a few VCs here and a couple more on the East Coast, but that was it. And the failure rate in new startups was high. There were no formal rules or even methodologies other than, well, you did everything this large company did, we want you to do here. And then the last thing was that information and expertise on how to build startups was clustered in very specific regions. Silicon Valley, Boston, New York. And there were no books, and ready for this, no blogs or even internet to figure out how to learn about it. What we're seeing now is radically different. We're in a golden age of the democratization of entrepreneurship and innovation. And what's happening now is more profound than a change in technology. What's happening now is these 7 limits to startups and innovation haven't just changed, they've completely gone away. The bounding box about constraints, about how to be innovative, how to get products to market are all gone. And the first thing that changed is that consumer internet and genomics are driving innovation at scale. So in the 50s and 60s, the U.S. defense and intelligence organizations drove the pace of innovation in Silicon Valley by providing R&D dollars to universities and then to defense companies that build weapon systems that use the Valley's first microwave devices and chips. Those were the first customers. That's who you sold to. In the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the momentum shifted to large companies as large businesses supported innovation in PCs, communications hardware, and enterprise software. And government and enterprise suddenly became followers rather than leaders because today it's the consumer internet companies that are drivers of innovation. When the product and the channel are bits, adoption by tens and hundreds of millions and even billions of users. Can you imagine that? Billions of users of your product. Unbelievable. It can happen in years versus decades. And for life sciences, it was the initial public offering of Genentech that proved to investors that life science startups could be a gold mine and make them a ton of money. We went from just Silicon Valley to Life Science Valley. The second thing that changed is we're now compressing the product development cycle, which is a fancy term for how fast we could bring a product to market. In the 20th century, the startups I was part of, the time to build the first product release, hard to believe, was measured in years as we turned the founder's vision of what customers wanted into a product. And the way we did it is we simply turned the founder's vision into a feature spec, listing every possible feature the founding team envisioned into a monolithic release, that is what was called the first release, or release 1.0 of the product. And yet time after time, when the product shipped, the startups would find that customers didn't want or need these features, but that's what we kept on doing, and that's what our investors kept on doing. The first release of the product was essentially the kitchen sink of everything we could think of. It turns out the term visionary founder was usually a synonym from someone who was hallucinating. And so the effort that went into making all these unused features actually were wasted. And today, by the way, startups build products radically differently. Instead of building the maximum number of features, they treat their vision as a series of untested hypotheses. It's a big idea. Vision is just a series of untested hypotheses. And then they do something that they never ever considered doing. Just they actually get out of the building and test a minimum feature set in front of customers. And that lets them deliver a series of what we now call minimum viable products in a fraction of the time. So for products that are simply bits delivered over the web, the first product can be shipped in weeks rather than years. Just amazing. The other piece of this, it's compressing the product development cycle, is that the founders need to stick around longer. Remember I said that the Before, in the 20th century, you'd have founders, and then after the first product, you'd get rid of them. Today, we take for granted that new mobile apps and consumer devices appear overnight, reaching tens of millions of users, but they just as quickly fall out of favor. In fact, just go take a look at your favorite app about 2 years ago, and the odds whether it's still your favorite app is about 50-50. But in the 20th century, technology swings inside of an existing market happen slowly, taking years, not months. And while there were new markets that were created, desktop PCs, etc., they were relatively infrequent. This meant, as I mentioned earlier, disposing of the founder and the culture that was responsible for the initial innovation didn't hurt a company's short-term or even mid-term prospects. So almost like clockwork, 20th century startups fired the innovators and founders when they started scaling. Big idea. A founder actually had a bullseye painted on their back. They were disposable. A company could go public on its initial wave of innovation and then coast on its current technology for years. So in this business environment, hiring a new CEO who had experience in growing a company around a single innovation was a rational decision for venture investors. But today, the pace of technology is relentless. It's hard to think of a hardware, software, or life science technology company that dominates its space for years. That means new companies face a risk of continuous disruption before their investors can cash out. It's a big idea. This isn't because investors actually love founders. It's because investors have figured out that having the founders stick around longer is what will make them money. So to stay in business in the 21st century, startups now do three things their 20th century counterparts didn't do. A company is no longer built on a single innovation. It needs to be continuously innovating. And who to do that best? Well, the founders. Number two is to continually innovate, they need to operate at startup speed and cycle time much longer in the 20th century. That is, we used to say, great, startup, dogs, food, great, okay, we hired a new CEO, all that's gone. We now act like a big company with HR and process manuals and procedures and org charts, etc. If you notice, Google, Facebook, etc., some of the very large companies in Silicon Valley have kept that startup culture for innovation around longer because this requires, and is a requirement of continuous innovation. And who best to keep that around? The founders. And then finally, continuous innovation, the third part of this, requires the imagination and the courage to challenge the founder's initial hypotheses. Gee, I think we're in business X and we're selling product Y. This might mean competing with and necessarily killing your own products. Think of the relentless cycle of the iPhone and iPod innovations. Professional CEOs who excel at growing businesses find this extremely hard to do. Who's best to do that? Well, the founders who came up with the initial ideas. That was big idea number 3, change 3. The fourth thing that's changed is you could start a company on your laptop and your credit card, rather than the millions of dollars that were required when I was an entrepreneur. When I was a startup entrepreneur, literally the minimum going in bid to raise money was about $4 million. I needed to buy a mini computer called a VAX. Anyone remember what that thing was? Some of you remember VAX? Oh, then it needed software. Well, there was another $1 million. Oh, then I needed to hire people. Oh, another $1 million. And because my investors might have been smart, or I might have been smart, I know I'm going to be whatever schedule I was on, I'm going to be at least 1.5 to 2 times late, so another $1 million to flop. There goes $4 million. So a hardware startup had to spend that money not only to get funded, but if I was building hardware, I needed a factory to manufacture the product. Today, that's radically changed. Open source software has slashed the cost of software development from millions to thousands of dollars. My students think of computing power as nothing more than a utility, just like I think of electricity. They can get to more computing power via their laptops through Amazon Web Services than existed in the entire world when I started in Silicon Valley. Think about that. Any student on this campus or anywhere in the world could just plug into the net and get more computing horsepower than ever existed anywhere at any time on the planet. Unbelievable. And for consumer hardware, no startup has to build their own factory, and the costs are absorbed by the offshore manufacturers. China has simply become the factory for startups. The cost of getting the product out of the door for an internet commerce startup has dropped by a factor of 100 or more in the last decade. Now, ironically, while that's dropped, the cost of scale has grown exponentially because it can now take tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to actually scale or grow the business. Now, the fifth change is the new structure of how startups get funded. The funding cost of getting a product to market, particularly for internet startups, has shaken up the venture capital industry. Venture capital used to be a very tight club, clustered around formal firms located in Silicon Valley on Sand Hill Road, in Boston and New York. In fact, when I came out to the Valley, believe it or not, it wasn't clear whether Boston was going to be the leading center of innovation or it was going to be out here. Unbelievable. And just as an aside, the way I think about what happened is when money to venture capitalists became unleashed in the late 70s, the Boston venture capitalists continued to act like bankers, and the venture capitalists here started acting like pirates. And the pirates won. So while those firms are still there, the pool of money that invests risk capital has expanded, and new classes of investors have emerged. First, venture capital and angel investing is no longer a U.S. or Eurocentric phenomenon. Risk capital has emerged in India, particularly in China and other countries where risk-taking, innovation, and liquidity is encouraged on a scale previously only seen in the U.S. And for those who've never been in China, venture capital feels like the Wild West days here of 1960s and 70s. Second, the new group of venture capitalists, angels or super angels, smaller than the traditional multi-hundred million dollar VC funds, can make small investments to get a consumer internet startup launched. And they make lots of early bets, and they double down when the results appear to be looking good. Third, venture capital has now become founder-friendly. And let me tell you, that's a radical change. In the 20th century, a VC was likely to have an MBA or a finance background. A few, like John Doerr or Don Valentine at Sequoia, had operating experience, but in a large company. But out of the dot-com rubble in the 21st century, new VCs entered, and this time with startup experience. The watershed moment for these VCs was in 2009 when a guy named Mark Andreessen, who happened to be the co-founder of Netscape, formed a venture firm and started to invest in founders with a radical goal of how to teach them to be CEOs for the long term. It's a big idea. Instead of saying, oh yeah, thank you, you'll be around, and, winking at the other VCs knowing you're going to replace them, Andreas, because he had been through it himself, started an arms race to see who could be the most friendliest to founders. Continuous innovation was here to stay, and only founders, not hired execs, for the reasons I described earlier, can play and win. And so founder-friendly became a competitive advantage for his firm. And in a seller's market, all the other VCs adopted this invest in the founder strategy. The other piece that's changed for VCs, and in a major way, is corporate investors and hedge funds have jumped into later stage deals with a passion, and their need to get high-profile deals, that is, they want to own a piece of Uber, or Facebook, or Twitter before they went public, drove late-stage valuations into unicorn territory. Does everybody know what a unicorn? Anybody know what a unicorn is? A unicorn is a startup with a market capitalization north of $1 billion. North of $1 billion. Most of them haven't even turned a profit, but they're worth over $1 billion, at least on paper. What this means is, with the emergence of incubators and super angels, have dramatically expanded the sources of seed capital, that is how to start the company. VCs have now seeded more control to founders, and corporate investors and hedge funds have dramatically expanded the total amount of money available. And the globalization of entrepreneurship means the worldwide pool of potential startups have increased at least 100-fold since the turn of the century. And by the way, those unicorns, None of them existed 8 years ago. Today there are over 200 startups, unicorns, worth over $1 billion. So 2 more to go. Change number 6. Starting a company means you no longer act like a big company. Now, since the turn of the century, there's been a radical shift how startups think of themselves. Until then, investors and entrepreneurs told startups, without ever actually saying these exact words, we want you to do everything a large company does. You know, large companies write business plans, we want you to write a business plan. Large companies hire VPs of sales, VP of marketing, VP of engineering on day one. We want you to do the same thing. Large companies build their product in a serial manner called waterfall development. We want you to do the same thing. We now understand not only is that wrong, but it's not kind of wrong, it's going out of business wrong. It's like stupidly wrong. It's as wrong as you could give anybody any advice. We should be surprised that we got any successful startups at all. We did. So it wasn't like incredibly stupid, but pretty close. What used to happen is you build a product, have a great launch, that is, you know, call the press in and have like fancy parties, and in the 20th century you would get press and there would be ink on newspapers. Again, those were dead trees with ink on them, and everybody would high-five the VP of marketing for great press, and then at the first board meeting they'd ask the VP of sales how they were doing versus the sales plan. And the VP of sales would utter a traditional response. And the response was the question, how are we doing? They'd say, we have a great pipeline. You might understand what a pipeline is? A pipeline means we didn't sell a thing, but it's all going to be good someday. And this would continue for months as customers weren't behaving as per the business plan. In fact, sometimes I jokingly suggested perhaps we ought to ship a copy of the business plan with every product, and some people started taking notes, ship the business plan with product. I said, no, that's not the solution. But meanwhile, every other department in your company would actually be making a plan, which means every other department was actually burning cash as per plan, but sales wasn't bringing in revenue. So finally, the board would fire the first VP of sales, bring in a new VP of sales, and 9 months later, the new VP of sales would still be saying great pipeline, and who gets fired next? Anybody know? Can't be the head of sales, just hired him or her. It's the VP of marketing. So you fire the VP of marketing because obviously it's not a sales problem, it's a positioning problem. Then 9 months later, who gets fired again? The founder. So it's obviously a founder problem because it's not sales, can't be marketing, must be a product problem. Never once did anybody ever ask that perhaps our initial hypotheses about who the customers were, what features they wanted, what was the pricing, were these the right customer segments or right channel? We never once questioned the plan. What we should have been firing on day one is components of the plan, not individuals. It's not that always the individuals are the right people. Oh, we never questioned the plan. Why? Because your investors funded the plan. We never questioned whether they could be wrong. What we learned is while companies execute business models, startups actually search for them. It means that unlike large companies that already know customers and features and pricing and competitors, startups were guessing about all those things. We now understand that startups are actually just a temporary organization designed to search, big idea, search for a repeatable and scalable business model. And so in the last decade, we've built a set of management tools to grow startups. Entrepreneurs now map their assumptions and test these hypotheses with customers outside in the field, a process called customer development. And they use an iterative and incremental development model called Agile and to build a product. And when they discover their assumptions are wrong early on, we don't fire people. We do something called a pivot. And a pivot is just a substantive change to what our expectations were to something else. If we do this rapidly enough, we get to stay in business. The result is that startups now have tools to speed up the search for customers, reduce time to market, and slash the cost of development. And this was my small contribution to be part of the team inventing what's now called the Lean Startup methodology. So the last and you finally got to the word last, key point, was change number 7, the last one. It's probably the most profound and one students graduating Crown College, and all the other colleges at UC Santa Cruz, and all other universities across the world don't have a clue about. And that's that today, information is everywhere. Hard to believe, in the 20th century, that learning the best practices of a startup CEO was limited by your caffeine bandwidth intake. That is, the only way you learn best practices from your board or from others was by having coffee. That was it. There were no books on startups. There were no websites on startups. There were no blogs on startups, no magazines on startups. Hard to believe. Today, every founder can read all there is to know about running a startup online. And in addition, incubators and accelerators like Y Combinator, Techstars have institutionalized experiential learning. Even the US government has now gone into the game with the National Science Foundation Innovation Corps, which is now taught here. Raise your hand. Right? And they provide experienced and hands-on mentorship and offer a growing network of founding CEOs. The result is today's CEOs have exponentially, maybe by a factor of 1 million, more information than their predecessors. This is ironically, by the way, part of the problem. Reading about entrepreneurship, hearing about it, and learning about how to build a successful company is not the same as having done it. Information does not mean experience, maturity, or wisdom. But it does mean they do have a heck of a lot of information. So I think we've just achieved a singularity, the entrepreneurial singularity. The barriers to entrepreneurship are not just being removed. In each case, they're being replaced by innovations that are speeding up each step, some by a factor of 10, some by a factor of 100. And while innovation is moving at internet speed, it's not just limited to internet commerce startups. It's spread to the enterprise, to life sciences, and ultimately every other business segment. And we're seeing the effect of this on every part of the world we were used to. Those of you who ever shop in a mall or been to Macy's or any other retail store understand that literally as we speak, malls are shutting down, retailers are going out of business. Most students graduating today have no idea what a Blockbuster record or video store was. Most have never gotten their news from a physical newspaper. I just find it unimaginable. But if we're at a cusp of a revolution as important as the scientific and industrial revolution, what does it mean? So what's really interesting is revolutions are not obvious when they happen. When James Watt started the Industrial Revolution with a steam engine in 1775, no one stood next to him and said, this is the day everything changes. And while Carl Benz drove around Anaheim in 1885, no one said, yeah, there's going to be 500 million of these driving around in a century. And certainly not as long ago as in 1958, when Noyce and Kilby invented the integrated circuit, the idea of a quintillion, 10 to the 18th transistors being produced each year seemed not only like impossible, but ludicrous. It's possible we're going to look back to this decade as the beginning of our own revolution. We're going to remember this as the time when scientific discoveries and technology breakthroughs were integrated into the fabric of society faster than they ever been before, when the speed of how business operated changed forever. So as the time when we reinvented the American economy and our gross domestic product began to take off, and the US and the world reached a level of wealth never before, it actually may be the dawn of a new era for a new American economy built on entrepreneurship and innovation. So thank you.